I am Joel Bragdon, and I want to give you orientation today on a model scenery system that uses resin materials instead of plaster or other heavy materials such as hydrocal. This is an all resin-based scenery system that I call geodesic foam or geofoam scenery. I have been a model railroader all my life, and I've been in the scenery business or model scenery business for over 35 years. And I tried to do the scenery that I wanted for my model railroads out of plaster, the traditional methods. I was inspired by some of the early great model railroaders, John Allen and others, who were building big scenery with plaster. And I learned how to do it. I could build big scenery with plaster, but I wasn't satisfied with the quality of the result. I didn't like doing it either. It was heavy and brittle and messy, and it was unforgiving. I just didn't like working with it. So quite a few years ago, I started experimenting with resins, and I developed a system that I'm going to show you some samples of here today that are entirely made out of polyurethane resins. Everything on this scenery came out of these four bottles. There's an A and B casting resin and an A and B foam, and they mix together 50-50, and the result, when you know how to work with it, is scenery like this. It's easy to make, it's fun, and it's fast. The plaster material was not easy, it was not fun, and it was slow. So there's a difference. But the main difference between the plaster, the hydrocal that I was using in the past, and the geofoam scenery resin materials is the workability and the forgiving nature, rather, of the resin materials that allow you to do what you want to do. And the resin lets you be creative and do the work that you want, whereas the plaster is always throwing limitations and roadblocks in the way. So I did plaster for several decades. Then since I developed the geofoam scenery system, I've been doing geofoam scenery for now almost 3 decades, another at least 27 years since I developed it. And I've built 85 layouts with big mountain scenery with this process. In the intervening years, I've built close to 80,000 square feet of model railroad scenery. The quality is better than that of the plaster. There's no air bubbles, and the material, again, is very, very workable. So some of the processes are similar to what you might know about plaster. We make a framework, but instead of heavy plywood for my framework and my ribs, I use foam board. I've got a rib going here and one on the other end to create the basic framework and form for my mountain shape here, but it's all foam board. With plaster, because it's so heavy and brittle, the frameworking material would have to be plywood, which adds great expense and great time and great weight to your finished process. Plus, it's much more difficult to work with. The geofoam scenery is 1/10 the weight of plaster, so a huge difference. The amount of resin on this entire module here is equal to about what's in these bottles here, or about 4 pounds. Now, if this was plaster, it would be, I'd have to guess, but 100 pounds, I think, easily, fairly close to 100 pounds, maybe even a little bit more. So there's a difference in the weight, and the geofoam scenery resin is incredibly durable. It's essentially a fiberglassing type process, so very lightweight, very high strength. I actually recently recorded a video of me building this particular diorama, and in one segment of that how-to video, I actually stand on this. When I build big scenery on a layout for perhaps a customer, I usually have to crawl around on it and climb on the scenery just to reach things. So it's very durable. It will allow for that. The materials are polyurethane foam. They're odorless. They're non-toxic. They are not food. They're non-toxic if you don't eat them, but just to handle them, there's no smell, there's no off-gassing fumes. You do wear rubber gloves. They are very sticky, so really the only precaution is to wear disposable gloves. And I use polyurethane foam as the behind-the-scenes building block material. And then I use a polyurethane casting resin called cast satin that takes our detail from our molds, and it's designed to give this great detail of the rock without leaving any air bubbles behind. The textures come out of rubber molds. This is our number 85 mold that it's actually right in through here. It's a very rugged, textured casting from this mold. Takes about 4 fluid ounces of resin to make this mold. So very, very lightweight, yet very, very durable finish casting. There are alternatives to the molds. We also have hollow form molds that make big peaks and outcrops. Pieces such as this come out of the mold. Instead of solid plaster, if I filled this mold with plaster, it would weigh 45 pounds. And here it's just maybe 8 ounces. So got a few ounces of resin, strong enough to stand on, or 40 to 45 pounds of plaster. Big difference right there. To cast a mold like this, you just mix the resin, pour it into the mold, and then just turn it around like this, letting the resin coat the interior of the mold for a few minutes until it sets up. And once it's set, a mold like this, you'd probably give it a second coat. But after about 10 minutes, the casting would be ready to come out of the mold, and it just peels right out. It's very easy to do. These flat molds are even easier to do. You would work with this flat on a table, pour the resin into the mold and spread it around with glove-covered fingers and just kind of spread it around on the mold. Wait about 4 or 5 minutes, perhaps as much as 10, and then peel the casting out. And the casting is going to be as flexible as the mold itself. So the casting out of the mold will then bend to whatever contour you wish to cover with it. You can build complex three-dimensional outcrops. This was a flat mold here. It came out of the mold flat like this, but I just bent it. I glued it along here, and I glued it on the other side. I typically use hot glue on an indoor project. You don't have to, but it's quick and easy and inexpensive. I like hot glue as my adhesive. These materials can also be used outdoors. There's a few slight differences between indoors and out, and the adhesive is one of them. Hot glue would soften in the sun on a really hot summer day, so it's not a good primary adhesive for the Geofoam scenery, but there are other things. Liquid nails and PL polyurethane glue are all quite suitable for outdoor use. And another difference between indoor and outdoor use of the resins materials is coloring. Where indoor use, we start with white. The resin itself comes out white, and then we cover it with a white primer and paint the color on with acrylic washes. Outdoors, because your coloring may get scratched by doing some gardening, we actually add colorant to the resin. So instead of coming out white, it comes out a base color, and then you put your finish paints over the top of that, and it gets scratched a little bit by hitting it with a hoe or a rake. It doesn't show pure white under the paint that got scratched. It just shows some base neutral color. So there's a very few differences between indoors and out. The resins being plastic can handle water and heat and snow. They hold up very, very well outside. So when I design a piece of mountain scenery, I don't just build straight cliff faces. I like to have some undulation in the surface, and it's really easy to do with the castings because they bend. I actually attach it here, and I attach it here, and it's hollow back underneath, and I backfill that with the foam resin later on, and then carve it off and add some gravel. So right here, it's actually just foam material, and that gives me a ledge on which I can plant trees. If you look at the other side of the canyon, you'll see these series of little ledges stepping up the hillside, and the bigger trees are at the bottom, then they get a little bit smaller above track level, and then a little bit higher, they get a little bit smaller, and the smallest trees are at the very top. Those ledges allow you to do that and force the perspective of the finished result. So with the geofoam scenery, it's quick and easy to build. It's much faster than plaster. You can work with larger molds because the materials are very light in weight. The workability of the material is really the key factor, the huge advantage over plaster, but it's also much lighter in weight and much more durable. Another key factor is the final result. There's no air bubbles. You're going to actually get better results from your castings with this than plaster. There's no way that molds of this kind of complexity could come out of a mold if it were plaster. Those points and pinnacles would just break off into the mold, whereas with the resin it just pops right out and it's extremely durable. The coloring is another advantage with the geofoam scenery. We coat everything with a white primer that comes out of the mold white, but then we paint that with a white primer and use artist's acrylics to do our coloring, and it gives you great control over the color, whereas plaster actually sucks the paint into the porous plaster surface, and it's much less controllable, much harder to get the result that you want. So this piece was made during the recording of a video that we have available on how to do this, about 2 hours long. And this was made over a period of a few hours during one long day recording session. So it all goes fairly quickly. You don't have to wait to paint it. You build it, you prime it, you paint it, and something like this can be accomplished in a single day. If you have a helper, you can work even much faster than that. So at the end of this video, you'll find links to resources on the video and our materials, the resin materials and the molds. We have a huge selection of molds available, and you'll find links to all of that at the end of this YouTube video. We hope you'll all check it out and perhaps give geofoam scenery a chance on your next scenery project. Thank you for watching.